I'm Becky Frank, and I'm making this recording for Excelsior classes. Today, I want to tell you about an amazing moment in American history. Today, I want to tell you the story of Balto, the hero of Nome. Nome, Alaska, in January of 1925, was facing a diphtheria epidemic. Dr. Curtis Welch, the town's doctor, had noticed an uptick in the number of sore throats and tonsillitis in December of 1924. But he didn't suspect diphtheria because the illness wasn't widespread enough. Diphtheria is very contagious. It passes from one person to another by water droplets from coughing and sneezing. Its symptoms include a fever and a sore throat and swollen glands. It's a bacterial infection, and the bacteria creates a poison within the victim's body that creates a thick mucus that covers their mouths, their noses, and their throats. It makes it very difficult to swallow or to breathe. It can also cause heart and kidney failure and paralysis. Now, most children today are vaccinated against diphtheria. That was not the case in 1925. A diphtheria vaccine had been developed in 1923, but it was not yet widespread use, especially not somewhere as remote as Alaska. So diphtheria was treated with an antitoxin serum and antibiotics. With the best medical care, 1 in 10 children that contracted diphtheria would die from it. Without the serum and the antibiotics, the mortality rate rose, I should say, to 50%. So in 2019, we had 4 cases of diphtheria in America, and there were only 2,700 cases worldwide. Nome itself had a population of about 2,000 people in 1925. During the gold rush days, around the turn of the century, 1899 to 1909, there had been 20,000 people living in Nome. When you take in the outlying rural areas, there's about 10,000 people at risk of diphtheria. Dr. Welch had ordered the serum for his hospital, but it had not arrived before the port closed in, iced in for the winter. Diphtheria was confirmed in mid-January when a 3-year-old boy died. A 7-year-old girl came to the hospital with symptoms a few days later. She was given the expired serum and died within hours. Realizing that they were getting ready to be hit with an epidemic of diphtheria, Dr. Welch and the town council quarantines Nome and radio telegraphed a message for help. It's here on the screen. By the end of January, there were 20 confirmed cases of the disease and 50 suspected cases, unknown numbers of diphtheria cases in the rural areas. Dr. Welch expressed that he feared they could experience 100% mortality if no serum was found. And the area's population had been reduced by half by the Spanish flu when it came through in 1919. And so they were still trying to recover from that. And then we said the only way they could get it was by mail. We did have, the port was iced in. There was no train. They did have open cockpit airplanes in 1925, but they could not fly in the conditions that Alaska was experiencing at that time. Alaska was in the midst of one of the worst winters it had had in the last 20 years. There were temperatures below 50 degrees below zero, 25-mile-an-hour winds, and 10-foot snowdrifts. It was winter in Alaska, so the sun was only up for about 6 hours a day. And so the plan was to have the best sled dog teams run a relay race from Nenana, where the train stopped, to Nome, where they needed the medicine. The trip usually took 30 days, but they only had 6 days before the serum would expire. And so as soon as the serum comes off the train at 9 o'clock at night on the 27th, Wild Bill Shannon and his team head out. At 9 p.m., it is minus 50 degrees. It was minus 62 degrees by 3 a.m. when he hands off the serum. Shannon will suffer from hypothermia, and 3 of his dogs will pass away as a result of the effort put forth to get the serum to the next leg. As you can see, there were lots of teams. There are 20 different teams involved. The next one I want to talk about is Togo and Sepula. Leonard Sepula and his team, led by Togo, got the serum on January 31st. They had the longest and most difficult leg of the journey. They chose to cross the frozen Norton Sound to save time. They took a shortcut across the edge of the sound. And they experienced blizzard-like conditions. The wind was breaking up the ice on the frozen sound. Sepula couldn't see where he was going. Fortunately, Togo knew the way. Once they reached the shore, they handed it off to the next musher, a Charlie Olson, who will go 25 miles before handing it off to this man, who is Gunnar Kaysen. Kaysen gets the serum at 10 o'clock at night. The conditions were so bad he could not even see his dogs at the end of the sled. Balto led the team by smell rather than sight because Balto couldn't see either. At one point, an 80-mile-an-hour gust turned the sled over, and the medicine went into a snowbank. Kaysen took off his gloves to find it in the snowbank and suffers frostbite for his efforts. He arrives in port safely to hand it off to the last musher, but they're not ready. He's ahead of schedule. And so Kaysen and Balto continue on the journey, and they arrive in Nome at 5:30 in the morning. Here they are, arriving in Nome at 5:30 in the morning. There were 150 dogs and 20 drivers in the relay. They traveled 674 miles in 127 and a half hours. The sub-zero temperatures and near blizzard conditions and hurricane force winds. 4 dogs will pass away in the attempt. Many of the mushers will suffer frostbite on their fingers and faces, but only 7 children in Nome died. Maybe as many as 100 in the outlying areas, but it was not the catastrophe they thought it could be. Kaysen and Balto were immediately named the heroes of the day. They toured the country. They received a special commendation from President Coolidge, and there is a statue of Balto in New York City Central Park. The inscription on the monument says, "In dedication to the indomitable spirit of the sled dog that relayed the antitoxin 600 miles over rough ice across treacherous waters and Arctic blizzards to the relief of the stricken of Nome in the winter of 1925. So even though Balto is the one represented on the monument, they do give a nod to all the dogs involved. Balto is in New York City when his statue is revealed in Central Park in December of 1925. Kaysen and Balto become part of a vaudeville act and tour. They're also the star of a film, Balto's Race to Nome. In 1927, he is purchased by rescue and placed in a Cleveland zoo, where he'll live till 1933, when he dies of old age. His body is still in the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. Alaska, by the way, wants Balto's body back, but right now Ohio is not giving it up. That's an interesting little conflict there. Some people believe that Balto and Kaysen unfairly received the fame. If anyone should have been singled out as the hero of the event, it should have been Sepula and Togo. They traveled further, they had worse conditions, they took that risky shortcut across the sound, and they do become part of an advertising campaign for Lucky Strike cigarettes, but it's nothing like what Balto received. The serum run was Togo's last race. He died in 1929, and his body is preserved in the Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race headquarters in Wasilla, Alaska. The diphtheria outbreak in Nome and the Great Race of Mercy captured the attention of the nation. Newspaper and radio coverage of the serum run and the successful use of the antitoxin to stop the disease helped spur the campaign to get children vaccinated. The Siberian Husky breed was now famous and demand for non-sled dog purposes. Now they're pets too. The lasting legacy of the Great Serum Run is the Iditarod Race, which takes place in March of every year. It was first organized in 1967 to celebrate Alaska's centennial. It was originally called the Iditarod Trail Sepula Memorial Race. Several years, a lack of snow has caused the starting point to move, but every year the race attracts as many as 100 teams to compete. In the early years, it took 20 days to complete the course, but now most teams complete it in 10. And this is the trail, very similar. They have 2 trails, actually, an odd year trail and an even year trail, but it does go, starts in Anchorage and finishes at Nome. All right, well, thank you for spending some time with me today. If you're interested in any classes that I teach at Excelsior, I have several in American history and medieval history and economics. Join us at excelsiorclasses.com. Thank you.